There are stories that unravel so explosively they seem plucked from the most dramatic works of fiction, tales of betrayal, hidden heirs, and unimaginable consequences. This is one such story. Picture a revered millionaire, his influential empire built on brilliance and hard work, teetering on the brink when a scorching scandal explodes. He has fathered a child with his mistress. The world stands aghast, but soon an even more stunning twist emerges. His pregnant wife's unborn baby is the genuine heir to his fortune and future. What unfolds next is a tangle of lies, heartbreak, and the merciless hand of karma, unraveling secrets no one could have predicted. James Lockwood was not always a millionaire. In fact, he had grown up in a modest two-bedroom apartment on the outskirts of Cincinnati, raised by parents who ran a small deli and worked tirelessly to send him to a decent school. Fate smiled upon him, though, and by the time James was 26, he had graduated from the Wharton School with a degree in economics and had begun forging a path that would eventually catapult him into the high echelons of wealth. His brilliance in spotting lucrative investments was almost uncanny. Early on, he became good friends with Edward Kenway, a fellow Wharton alumnus who later joined Morgan Stanley. Edward introduced James to a circle of top-tier investors, hedge fund managers, and venture capitalists. James quickly gained their trust by turning mediocre prospects into thriving ventures, seemingly overnight. Within 10 years, James Lockwood was a name whispered in revered tones in financial corridors from New York to Singapore. His first entrepreneurial triumph was Lockwood Investments, a boutique advisory firm that specialized in identifying underappreciated industries. His big break came when he convinced a group of skeptical investors to pour money into a small biotech startup that ended up creating one of the earliest gene editing technologies. When that company went public, James pocketed enough money to buy himself 3 penthouses in Manhattan, though he decided to settle for just one. At 38, James stood at a personal net worth of over $300 million. That was when he met Catherine Montgomery, the only daughter of a steel magnate from Pittsburgh. Catherine Montgomery was every bit as ambitious as James, albeit in a different way. She was raised in wealth, but recognized early on that her family's empire was too tied to old industries. She wanted to push them into more modern technology-driven markets, and she recognized a kindred spark in James's vision. They married in a grand ceremony at the Plaza Hotel in New York City. Newspapers ran stories about this new power couple who together seemed unstoppable. They had everything, youth intelligence, and a near-limitless network of influential friends. The wedding was a veritable who's who of financiers, industrialists, and even a few Hollywood stars. Edward Kenway was James's best man, publicly jesting. James could probably convince the sun to rise in the west if he had a mind to. The couple set up their primary residence in a sprawling estate in Greenwich, Connecticut. James, who once lived in a cramped apartment, now spent weekends strolling around rose gardens and cherishing the expansive property. Catherine threw herself into philanthropic endeavors. She organized charity galas and fundraisers, deeply committed to supporting cancer research and the arts. Her mother had died of a rare form of leukemia, and the cause was close to her heart. Behind the immaculate facade, though the first cracks began to form, James's frenetic schedule left little time for their relationship. In private, Catherine felt neglected. Their initial spark was overshadowed by James's obsession with growth investments and an unquenchable desire to multiply his wealth. Their fights were subdued, but tense. A bruise on the marriage, but not enough to break it yet. And so the seeds of discontent were planted. James Lockwood was on top of the world professionally, but personally, his life was about to enter a storm more destructive than any he had known. Financial success did not quench James's longing for a family. Unbeknownst to outsiders, Catherine and James had been trying for a child for years. Catherine, having come from a big, warm, if somewhat old-fashioned family, yearned to create a loving household of her own. James, for his part, saw a child as the final piece of the puzzle to his perfect existence. A charming spouse, a palatial home, and a legacy to pass on to the next generation. Yet nature had not been cooperative. Doctor after doctor was consulted, tests were run, then rerun. Catherine underwent hormone therapies and changed her diet. James scaled back his overseas trips to be more present, and for several anxious months they tried in earnest to conceive. Each negative test brought heartbreak. Their frustration mounted behind closed doors, and it took a toll on their relationship. During that time, Catherine's father passed away, leaving her in a state of mourning. She inherited a significant stake in the family's steel business, which she now had to manage alongside her philanthropic duties. The stress of these responsibilities only compounded the strain on her body and mind. James tried to be supportive in his own way. He hired additional staff to help Catherine with administrative tasks, brought in top managers to streamline operations, and encouraged her to take breaks. But there was always a distance. Their conversations grew more businesslike. The warmth, the laughter, the simple joy they once shared became rationed luxuries. Then, seemingly out of the blue, Catherine's spirit revived when she received the news she'd been praying for. She was pregnant. It happened during an unremarkable Tuesday after a routine checkup at the fertility clinic. Dr. Martin Klein at Cedars-Sinai, famed for helping high-profile couples conceive, called her personally. His voice was jubilant. Catherine, the test results came back positive. Congratulations. Overwhelmed with relief, she rushed to James's office, tears of joy streaking her face. For a moment, all the tension between them vanished. James, momentarily forgetting about a critical conference call with a group of Middle Eastern investors, swept Catherine into his arms. He even excused himself from his meeting, an almost unheard-of occurrence, and took her out to dinner in a discreet, upscale restaurant. There they spoke of the future with unbridled excitement. The baby's nursery, the possible names, the kind of education they would provide. Everything felt hopeful and right. Catherine was glowing. James had tears in his eyes more than once that evening. They resolved to focus on family, to carve out time in their busy schedules. "Everything changes now," Catherine whispered that night, pressing a hand to her abdomen. James nodded, a rare softness in his eyes. "I know, and it's going to be incredible." For a few weeks, bliss reigned in the Lockwood household. Catherine's morning sickness was intense, but her spirit soared. James took fewer business trips, showed a gentler side, and eagerly shared the happy news with Edward Kenway and a select group of close friends. Catherine's philanthropic circle toasted her whenever she appeared at a gala. At last, the Lockwoods' marriage felt resilient, as if it had weathered its storms and emerged stronger. However, life has a way of throwing curveballs when things appear smoothest. Unknown to Catherine, a new presence had slithered into James's life months earlier, in the form of a gorgeous and cunning woman named Felicia Dumont. A woman who was about to upend everything Catherine believed about her marriage and the future of her family. Felicia Dumont had a face that turned heads wherever she went. Tall, slender, with raven black hair that cascaded down her back, she was dangerously captivating. Born and raised in Paris, Felicia moved to New York in her late 20s. She had ambitions far beyond the typical realm of runway modeling or acting. She wanted a seat at the tables of the ultra-wealthy. Her path crossed with James Lockwood's during a luxury tech conference in Dubai. Felicia worked as a high-end freelance consultant for aspiring European startups, seeking funding from American investors. She would scout potential donors, charm them, and make sure the business deals landed. She was not an industry expert, nor did she pretend to be. Her expertises lay in persuasion and seduction. James had initially approached Felicia in the lavish foyer of the Burj Al Arab. He was asking for directions to a minor breakout session, and she responded with a playful smile. Later that evening, they met again at a networking party among gold-plated decor and a sea of business suits. Felicia was in a sleek emerald gown, her laughter echoing through the room as she effortlessly glided from one cluster of influential men to another. James introduced himself more formally, a slight flush coloring his cheeks as he took in her devastating beauty. One drink led to another, one conversation to a next. They found themselves alone on a balcony overlooking the glittering Dubai skyline. James knew better. He was a married man, albeit a frustrated one. He was also no stranger to fleeting temptations. But something about Felicia's confidence and the way she said his name kept him anchored in place. He told himself it was harmless, that it was just conversation. 2 nights later, after the grand finale of the conference, James found himself in Felicia's hotel suite. Their affair began with the illicit electricity of stolen kisses and whispered secrets. James was not only addicted to her beauty, but also to the sense of power he felt in her presence. Felicia was thrilled to gain a wealthy, well-connected lover who could open endless doors. When they returned to the United States, the affair continued in stolen moments and clandestine weekends. Felicia would fly from New York to Boston to attend networking events, only to spend the night with James in a penthouse suite he kept under a shell corporation's name. Their arrangement was dangerously thrilling for both. James felt as if he'd found an outlet for the stress that weighed on him at home, Catherine's fertility struggles, the demands of business, and the stifling expectation of always being perfect in the public eye. Felicia gave him a world free from those restraints, one where nothing existed except pleasure and risk. But James was careful. He used burner phones, always demanded Felicia maintain secrecy, and never let her take any pictures of them together. Still, the more he tried to control the situation, the more Felicia tested the boundaries. She wanted dinners in public weekends in the Hamptons, a lavish trip to Europe. She wanted recognition. Ultimately, the affair would have stayed in the shadows, only known to a select few discreet staffers or unsuspecting colleagues. Had Felicia not discovered her own life-altering truth, she was pregnant with James Lockwood's child. The news came as a jolt to Felicia. While she had daydreamed of securing a permanent position in James's life, she hadn't considered the reality of becoming pregnant out of wedlock with a married man's baby. In her head, she saw the child as a golden key, a potential route to financial security beyond her wildest dreams. But she was also keenly aware of the precariousness. James could deny her, threaten her, or quietly push her out of his life. Felicia's cunning mind whirled with possibilities. She decided that revealing the pregnancy to James would be her trump card to be played at the right moment. Possibly he would leave his wife for her, or at least offer enough hush money to keep her comfortable. She believed she could control the narrative. Little did she know that fate was preparing a more complicated script with far higher stakes than even she anticipated. For Catherine Lockwood was pregnant too and determined to keep her family intact. It was a phone call that ignited Catherine's suspicions. Late one evening, as she sat in the family room sorting through invitations for upcoming charity galas, James's phone buzzed with an incoming call. He was upstairs in his study reviewing a major acquisition for Lockwood Investments. Catherine glanced at the phone's screen and saw only the initials FD and a strange, unrecognizable number. She hesitated, feeling a prickle of discomfort along her spine. James often had calls from people with cryptic initials, lawyers, bankers, or foreign collaborators. Yet something about FD triggered alarm bells. Perhaps it was the hour, or that James had been increasingly secretive. Lately, he had been receiving texts during dinner and stepping outside to answer calls. Initially, she tried to dismiss it. She was pregnant and emotionally sensitive, prone to overthinking. But the small seed of doubt planted itself firmly. That night, she asked James about his day, about any new ventures, trying to glean any mention of someone with the initials FD. He was vague, only offering generalities about ongoing deals in Europe. Over the following weeks, Catherine's unease grew. James seemed absent-minded. He'd returned from business dinners, looking exhausted, smelling faintly of perfume she didn't recognize. At times, a flicker of guilt crossed his face when their eyes locked. Still, Catherine tried to push away her suspicions, attributing his detachment to the stress of fatherhood. But then there was the strange envelope that arrived at their Connecticut estate one afternoon. Marked confidential, it was addressed to James, but no sender information was provided. Catherine recognized the neat, feminine handwriting. When she picked it up, she felt a tremor of foreboding. She walked it to James's study, placing it on his desk. Later that evening, she noticed it had vanished. He never mentioned it. Unable to bear the mounting anxiety, Catherine confided in her closest friend, Julia Penrose, an interior designer whose son attended the same private school Catherine once hoped her child would attend. Julia was shocked that Catherine even suspected James of infidelity. Like everyone else, she believed James was the consummate gentleman. But Catherine's pallor and trembling voice betrayed a deep-seated fear. Julia suggested Catherine hire a private investigator to confirm or dispel her worries once and for all. Catherine balked. She found the idea invasive, borderline paranoid. But the more she thought about it, the more it seemed the only way to preserve her sanity. She could not live in a limbo of guesswork. Enter Walter Thompson, a discreet private investigator based in New York City. He came recommended by Julia's friend, who had once used his services for a sensitive financial matter. Catherine arranged a covert meeting at a small cafe on the Upper East Side. She arrived wearing a simple hat and sunglasses, her nerves frayed. Walter, an unassuming man in his mid-50s, listened attentively to her story. "I don't want tabloid fodder," Catherine insisted, sipping her chamomile tea. "I just want the truth." Walter nodded. "I understand. Trust me. I handle these cases with discretion. I'll need James's travel itinerary, phone details, and any leads on who this FD might be." Within a week, Walter had turned up enough to confirm Catherine's worst fears. James had been repeatedly traveling to Boston on weekends, staying in a penthouse suite under a corporate alias. He had been spotted with a tall, dark-haired woman, always checking in together, though never once photographed in a compromising situation. Still, there was enough circumstantial evidence. When Catherine received the preliminary report, she felt her world tilt on its axis. She had to press a trembling hand to her swollen belly, as if to stabilize herself. This was betrayal at its rawest. She remembered every vow James had ever spoken, every promise of love, safety, and devotion. It all felt like a house of cards collapsing under the faintest breeze. Walter recommended she wait for more conclusive proof if she intended to confront her husband. He suggested a stakeout, or perhaps obtaining phone records with Catherine's permission, since most of the lines were in the family's name. Catherine, torn between heartbreak and a desire for clarity, gave the go-ahead. Over the next 2 weeks, the details grew painfully clear. The woman's name was Felicia Dumont. She traveled frequently. James had been paying for flights and extravagant dinners. The bills were coded under client relations in Lockwood Investments expense reports, Catherine's inner circle. Her dear friend Julia, and now Walter, urged caution. She was pregnant, vulnerable, and extremely emotional. The mere thought of confrontation made her nauseous and lightheaded. But fate would not wait for Catherine's readiness. It had its own timeline, one that would soon collide with the carefully cultivated secrecy of James and Felicia in a spectacular, life-altering way. Felicia Dumont faced her own set of anxieties. After multiple at-home tests and one visit to a private clinic near Fifth Avenue, she confirmed she was pregnant with James's child. She waited nearly a month before telling him. When she finally did, James reacted with shock and a swirl of conflicting emotions. He had always used protection, but no method was infallible. The reality of fathering a child with his mistress crashed down on him. He was excited at the prospect of having a child. Fatherhood had always been a dream, but it was overshadowed by the precarious nature of his situation. Catherine was pregnant too, and they had just started rebuilding the closeness in their marriage. "Felicia, you need to keep this quiet," James implored one night, pacing a penthouse living room high above Manhattan. "Catherine can't find out. Not now." Felicia, seated on a plush white sofa, crossed her arms. "I'm not the one shouting about it," she retorted. "But I won't hide forever." And that was the crux of it. Felicia wanted a guarantee for her future and for the babies. She dangled the possibility of going public, threatening to reveal the truth or to approach one of the tabloids if James didn't secure her financially. She wanted a luxury townhouse, a monthly allowance, and the promise that her child would inherit. James found himself torn. He had always been a strategic thinker, able to handle the complexities of multi-billion-dollar mergers with ease. But this was personal, messy, and emotional terrain he was unaccustomed to navigating. He offered Felicia a sizable apartment in Soho, fully paid for, and promised child support once the baby was born. But he stopped short of guaranteeing the child's place in his formal legacy. Felicia swallowed her frustration. She recognized that pushing too hard, too soon, risked alienating James completely. For the moment, she accepted the apartment, though she insisted on putting it in her name. James agreed, albeit reluctantly. His fear of losing everything he had with Catherine, combined with the swirling thrill of impending fatherhood, left him paralyzed. Meanwhile, Catherine was approaching her second trimester. Her belly was growing. Her cheeks were flushed with the glow of pregnancy, although her heart felt heavier each day. She was now certain James was cheating, but she had not yet confronted him. She worried that any explosive argument could harm the baby or trigger a stress-related complication. Every night she observed him, his tired eyes, the abrupt phone calls he took behind closed doors, the anxious lines on his face. She knew he was wrestling with secrets. She even wondered if he sensed that she, too, was onto him. But every day they went on with the facade of a loving couple, hosting dinner parties, attending charity galas. Yet the veneer was thinning. Catherine noticed him falter during these social appearances, offering forced smiles and half-hearted conversations. Their friends commented on how exhausted James seemed. The deeper the deception, the heavier the toll it took on his psyche. 2 pregnancies, 2 futures. James was now responsible for 2 new lives in drastically different situations. One child he had wished and prayed for with his wife, the other a product of forbidden passion. Yet, ironically, no one outside James, Felicia, and Catherine's private investigator truly knew the magnitude of this drama. In this fraught atmosphere, events began to accelerate. Felicia's demands increased. She was nearing the end of her first trimester, grappling with morning sickness and insecurities about her future. Catherine was silently gathering evidence, and James's business life was piling on pressure as well. An unfavorable trade war threatened to undermine several of his global investments, placing Lockwood Investments in a precarious position. In short, the storm clouds had gathered. The collisions, both personal and professional, were inevitable, and they would leave no one unscathed. The next pivotal turn arrived in the form of an invitation to a high-profile charity gala in Manhattan, hosted by none other than Teresa Huang, a well-known genealogist from Stanford University, who also held philanthropic interests in pediatric care. A glittering event it brought together celebrities, philanthropists, and top business magnates to raise funds for advanced genetic research. The irony was not lost on James. He was juggling 2 pregnancies with 2 different women, all while attending an event that focused on genetic legacies and healthcare. Catherine, despite her inner turmoil, insisted they both attend. She was a patron of the gala and had even donated a substantial amount in memory of her late mother. James agreed, hoping to maintain appearances and keep suspicion at bay. Dressed in a flowing emerald gown, Catherine glowed in her pregnancy, earning compliments from all corners of the ballroom. James stood beside her in a tailored tuxedo, forcibly smiling whenever a camera flashed their way. Beneath the polished veneer, every nerve in his body was on edge, especially because Felicia was also rumored to be in attendance. Sure enough, Felicia arrived accompanied by a startup founder she was supposedly consulting for. She radiated in a sleek black dress, eyes scanning the crowd like a hawk on the hunt. And then it happened. Felicia locked gazes with Catherine from across the room. It was not the passing glance of a stranger. It was a charged moment that Catherine, with her sharpened intuition, instantly recognized as a silent challenge. Catherine felt her stomach churn, not just with the typical nausea of pregnancy, but with an icy dread. She discreetly alerted Julia Penrose, who was also at the gala. "That woman in black." Catherine whispered, "She's the one." Julia's eyes widened. "Are you certain?" Catherine nodded. "There's a look in her eyes, like she wants me to know." At one point during the evening, James excused himself to speak with potential donors. Catherine, determined to keep her composure, mingled through the crowd, making small talk about art auctions and upcoming philanthropic events. But her thoughts kept returning to Felicia's piercing stare. The confrontation came unexpectedly in the ladies' powder room, an opulent salon with gilded mirrors and fresh orchids arranged on marble countertops. Catherine was touching up her makeup, mentally bracing herself for the possibility of crossing paths with Felicia. She almost hoped it wouldn't happen. But then Felicia stepped in alone, crossing the threshold with slow, deliberate steps. Their eyes met in the mirror. Silence. Catherine's heart raced. Her reflection in the mirror showed a poised woman, but inside she was trembling. Felicia stood behind her, an elegant figure exuding quiet confidence. Finally, Felicia broke the hush. "I'm surprised you don't know me," she said, her tone laced with an arrogance that curdled Catherine's blood. Catherine drew in a measured breath. She turned around, meeting Felicia's direct gaze. "I think I do." A thin smile curved Felicia's lips. "Then you know that your husband and I have business together." Catherine felt her throat constrict. The worst part of it all was Felicia's sheer audacity. This wasn't a timid woman apologizing or feeling remorse. It was someone who believed she held the upper hand. And that business would be what exactly? Felicia shrugged, placing a hand over her abdomen so lightly that Catherine would have missed it if she wasn't watching closely. "Ask James," she said, her eyes flicking down to Catherine's pregnant belly. "I'm sure you'll both figure it out eventually." The tension was suffocating. Catherine's voice trembled slightly, but she refused to back down. "Are you proud of yourself?" Felicia didn't hesitate. "I'm proud of my baby, and I'll do whatever it takes to ensure its future." With that, Felicia turned on her heel and glided out of the room, leaving Catherine pale and shaking. She clutched the marble countertop for support, her mind spinning. The vague suspicion was now a concrete reality. Felicia was pregnant, carrying James's child. Catherine spent the remainder of the gala in a trance, performing her social duties on autopilot, while her mind replayed Felicia's words. When they finally left, Catherine sank into the limo seat beside James, silent and distant. James tried to speak, but Catherine's curt "Not tonight" sealed his lips. At home, Catherine retreated to the guest bedroom, leaving James in a restless, sleepless vigil. The next morning, the phone began ringing before dawn. Word had leaked about a potential scandal swirling around the Lockwoods. Some journalist from a niche gossip site had made inquiries. Then James received a text from Felicia. "We need to talk. I want more." The gloves were off, and Catherine, who had once cherished the dream of a perfect family, was now preparing for war, even if it meant the end of her marriage, her public reputation, and everything she had worked to maintain. While James's personal life spun out of control, his professional world was also crumbling. A sudden downturn in global markets hit Lockwood investments hard, courtesy of a new wave of tariffs and political upheaval in Asia. James had large stakes in emerging tech companies that now faced supply chain disruptions. To make matters worse, rumors of James's affair were beginning to swirl in certain business circles, news that threatened investor confidence. Edward Kenway, longtime friend and collaborator, arranged an urgent meeting in Manhattan. The two men sat in a private conference room at Morgan Stanley's headquarters, the sleek glass walls affording a panoramic view of the city. Edward wasted no time. "James, the board is nervous. They're hearing whispers, something about a scandal involving you and an employee." James bristled. "She's not an employee, Edward. She's a consultant, a freelancer." Edward's gaze hardened. "It doesn't matter who she is. Investors only see a potential nightmare. They think if you can't keep your personal house in order, you might not be able to handle the stress of managing their millions." James ran a hand through his hair, which had begun to show early streaks of grey over the last few months. "It's complicated, and it's under control." "Is it?" Edward's voice rose in frustration. "Catherine's pregnant. Now I'm hearing Felicia is too. You're risking everything you've built because you couldn't keep your pants zipped." The barb stung, but James knew Edward spoke truth. "I'll handle it, Ed. Just give me some time." Time, however, was a luxury James didn't have. The meltdown in the markets required swift, decisive action. Several major investors threatened to pull out, concerned about James's capacity for leadership amid scandal and economic turbulence. James found himself working around the clock, juggling crisis talks, conference calls with global partners, and relentless damage control. He even tried to placate Felicia, who was rapidly becoming more aggressive in her demands. She threatened to go public if he didn't offer her financial guarantees, including trust funds for the baby, and a substantial monthly stipend, far beyond the apartment in Soho. Felicia's leverage was that she could sell her story to tabloids or confide in a nosy journalist, unleashing a tidal wave of negative press that could sink Lockwood investments. In the midst of all this, Catherine made the decision to confront James directly. She could no longer suffer in silent anguish. One evening she waited until he returned from a grueling board meeting. He looked exhausted, tie-loosened eyes bloodshot from lack of sleep. She stood in the foyer, arms folded over her pregnant belly. "We need to talk," she said, her tone rigid. James's shoulders slumped. He saw the steely resolve in her eyes and knew there was no escaping the conversation. They moved to the library, a stately room with dark mahogany shelves lined with volumes of finance history and literature. Catherine closed the door behind them, a deliberate act that made James's heart pound. "I know everything," Catherine said, voice shaking. "I hired a private investigator. I even spoke to her at the gala. She's pregnant with your child." James rubbed his face in his hands. "Catherine, I never meant. Don't insult me with excuses." Catherine snapped, tears burning at the corners of her eyes. "You made a choice. You chose her over me, over our family, over our child." He stepped toward her, attempting to place a hand on her shoulder. She recoiled. "I didn't choose her. It was a mistake, one that spiraled out of control." She let out a bitter laugh. "Spiraled out of control, James. You have a mistress living in a $1 million apartment. She's carrying your baby. That's not just a mistake. It's a second life." James's composure cracked. "I was overwhelmed, Catherine. I didn't know if we'd ever have a child. Our marriage felt distant. I was lonely and stressed." Her voice quieted, laced with anguish. "We were distant because you threw yourself into work at every opportunity, because you refused to acknowledge how much I needed you." Silence enveloped them thick with regret and sorrow. James couldn't look her in the eye. Finally, Catherine took a trembling breath. "I'm going to remain in this house. This is our child's home. Whether you stay or leave is up to you. But if you want to salvage anything, your relationship with me, with this baby, you will end things with her. Completely." James nodded, tears threatening to fall. "I will," he whispered. "I promise." Yet as determined as he seemed, the reality of extricating himself from Felicia's clutches was not simple. Felicia would not go quietly. Not when she believed she had the ultimate trump card, the unborn child who in her mind deserved an inheritance and a father's name. As the Lockwood empire teetered on the edge, stock prices fluctuating, investor trust waning, James faced the most critical juncture of his life: sever ties with Felicia and risk an explosive scandal, or continue placating her, which would surely destroy his marriage and further erode his business reputation. Time was ticking. Soon the locked doors and hushed whispers would no longer suffice. The truth was about to break in a very public, very devastating way. Under intense pressure, James told Felicia the affair had to end. He offered a final settlement, enough money to ensure her child would be cared for comfortably until adulthood. But to Felicia, the deal fell short of her ambitions. She wanted not just financial security. She wanted acknowledgement, a seat at the Lockwood table, and the prestige of being tied to James Lockwood's name. "This child is yours," Felicia insisted during a tense meeting in her Soho apartment. You're going to deny him everything he's entitled to. James's nerves frayed. I'm not denying anything, he said, voice trembling with pent-up frustration. I'm just not making him my sole heir. You knew the situation. Felicia, in a moment of fury, threatened to schedule a media interview. I'll go to the highest bidder. Let the tabloids tear your precious family apart. I have proof photos, texts, even your wire transfers. James froze. He had always been meticulous, but apparently not meticulous enough to prevent Felicia from gathering incriminating evidence. His mind raced with possible countermoves, legal injunctions, hush money, or intimidation, none aligned with the man he believed himself to be. Ultimately, Felicia's greatest bargaining chip was the baby's paternity proof, that James was the father. Catherine demanded a similar test. If Felicia's child truly was James's, Catherine wanted official documentation. She wanted no illusions or denials. Enter Dr. Martin Klein once again, along with a private genetics lab, recommended by Teresa Huang, who had offered to discreetly facilitate the test for both pregnancies. Catherine intended to confirm James's paternal status regarding Felicia's child. Felicia saw this as an opportunity to force James's hand if the test returned positive. James himself, reeling from the stress, complied, if only to quell the swirling doubts. Everyone expected the test to confirm what they already believed, that James Lockwood was the father of Felicia's unborn baby, and also father of Catherine's. They all anticipated a double confirmation that would only heighten the tension. But life, unpredictable and cunning, had other plans. On a stifling August afternoon, Dr. Klein called each party to arrange a meeting at his private Manhattan clinic. Felicia arrived first, wearing a sleek maternity dress, her confidence radiant despite the drama. Catherine arrived next, pale but resolute, accompanied by Julia Penrose for moral support. James arrived last, accompanied by his attorney, a man who had spent the past decade quietly handling Lockwood Investments' complicated deals. Dr. Klein's expression was grave as he ushered them into a confidential suite. Catherine clenched her fists, steeling herself for more heartbreak. Felicia's lips curved in a triumphant smirk, certain her baby's rightful claim would soon be validated. James stood between them, feeling as though his entire life had narrowed to this claustrophobic room with 2 pregnant women and his entire future on the line. There's no easy way to say this. Dr. Klein began adjusting his glasses. We have the results. He shuffled a set of papers. First, Catherine's child. The paternal DNA matches James Lockwood's profile. The probability of paternity is 99.99%. Congratulations, Mr. Lockwood. You are indeed the father. Despite the tension, James felt a flood of relief. Catherine inhaled shakily, a strange mixture of vindication and sorrow in her eyes. She already knew James was likely the father, but hearing it confirmed brought everything to a sobering reality. Felicia cleared her throat. And my test results? Dr. Klein's expression darkened further. Miss Dumont, the test indicates that James Lockwood is not the father of your child. A dead silence followed. For a moment it seemed the air had been sucked out of the room. Felicia's eyes widened in shock, her poised facade cracking like shattered glass. That's impossible, she stammered. There must be a mistake. James's attorney narrowed his gaze. Are you certain? Dr. Klein nodded. We rechecked the samples twice to be sure, Mr. Lockwood's DNA does not match the fetal DNA from Miss Dumont's sample. There's a 0% probability of paternity. Felicia's world imploded. She remembered the fleeting affair with a French entrepreneur in Boston a night of indiscretion while James had been away on an extended trip. She had convinced herself it was inconsequential. Or perhaps she had deliberately pinned James as the father, hoping to secure her golden ticket. Either way, the truth was out. Anger and humiliation twisted Felicia's features. "You're lying," she spat at Dr. Klein. "I want a second opinion." James, initially too stunned to speak, finally found his voice. "We have the results." "There's no mistake," he murmured, his shock giving way to a cautious sense of liberation. Felicia, the woman who had threatened to destroy his marriage and business, had built her claim on a lie. Catherine watched Felicia's meltdown, tears of rage and desperation coursing down the other woman's cheeks. In that moment, Catherine felt a mixture of pity and revulsion. This was the woman who had nearly shattered her life, and now she stood exposed before everyone. Felicia stormed out of the clinic, ignoring Dr. Klein's attempts to calm her. Catherine and James stood rooted in place, absorbing the seismic shift in their circumstances. The truth was out. James Lockwood had only one child on the way, Catherine's. Their child was the true heir. For Catherine, it was a moment of vindication. For James, it was a narrow escape from an even darker personal and public catastrophe. But the damage was done, and the wheels of karma had only just begun their turning. The explosive revelation reverberated through James's personal and professional spheres. Word traveled swiftly that Felicia Dumont's claim to the Lockwood fortune was false, and that her unborn child was not James's. While James felt a sense of relief, his reputation had still taken a blow. He had engaged in an affair, fatherhood scare or not. Felicia, in a desperate attempt to salvage her own image, leaked part of the story to an online tabloid. She framed herself as a scorned lover, a victim of James's manipulative promises. She didn't mention the paternity test that disproved his role. Instead, she spun a narrative of how James had coerced her into an affair, then abandoned her in her time of need. The tabloid ate it up, running incendiary headlines like, "Billionaire Lockwood's secret mistress speaks out, pregnant and alone." Overnight, James became the focus of media frenzy. Stock in Lockwood Investments dipped further as investors panicked over the mounting scandals. Edward Kenway pleaded with James to issue a public statement to quell the storm. Catherine watched the news unfold from their Connecticut estate. Though the truth cleared James of fathering Felicia's child, the betrayal of the affair was still a dagger through Catherine's heart. She endured phone calls from well-meaning friends, expressing shock acquaintances, fishing for gossip, and philanthropic circles that now treated her with hushed sympathy. At home, the tension between Catherine and James simmered. He was no longer denying his wrongdoing, but the trust between them was practically scorched earth. Catherine allowed him to stay in the mansion primarily because they needed to maintain a unified front against the raging media, and for the sake of her pregnancy. However, they slept in separate bedrooms. Conversations were tense, limited to logistics about the upcoming birth or the best way to handle the media. Amid all this chaos, a deeper crisis unfolded at Lockwood Investments. Major clients had begun to withdraw their funds, citing lack of confidence in the firm's stability. The media debacle only amplified the existing market pressures. Edward Kenway convened an emergency board meeting to discuss the future of the company. "We're hemorrhaging clients," Edward explained, addressing James and the rest of the board. "If we don't do something drastic, we could be looking at a collapse or a hostile takeover." Some board members blamed James directly for the fiasco. His personal drama, they said, had frightened investors and tarnished the firm's sterling reputation. A few even whispered about forcing him out as CEO. Facing this mounting opposition, James tried to rally them. He offered a strategic realignment, pledged to focus on stabilizing current holdings, and vowed to step away from any further public controversies. But the damage was done, and any solution that might save Lockwood Investments demanded swift, brutal measures, massive layoffs, liquidation of certain assets, a public apology to appease shareholders. James returned home that night feeling utterly defeated. He found Catherine in the sitting room, reading a book on pregnancy. She acknowledged him with a distant nod. After a pregnant pause, he sank into a chair, burying his face in his hands. "This is all my fault," he confessed, voice muffled. "I've ruined everything." Catherine's expression was unreadable. She set the book down. "You made terrible choices, James, but you have to fight to fix what you can. For our child's future." He lifted his head, eyes rimmed with fatigue. "I don't know if we can ever go back to how things were." A sad smile tugged at her lips. "I don't either. But for now, we focus on what's necessary, stabilizing the business and ensuring a safe environment for the baby." James nodded, tears threatening to spill. "I'm sorry," he said softly, though he knew apologies could only do so much. Days melted into weeks. Media coverage soared whenever Felicia leaked new tidbits, but the sensational story began to lose steam when Dr. Klein privately confirmed to the press that paternity tests did not match James's DNA. Public opinion turned against Felicia, painting her as a gold digger who tried to trap a billionaire. She lost credibility, lost prospective clients, and found the door to high society slammed shut. The hush money and sympathy she hoped to rake in vanished. As for James, the board demanded he step down temporarily as CEO to focus on damage control. Edward Kenway was appointed interim head, and an external PR team was brought in to manage the crisis. Thousands of employees worried about their jobs. Tens of thousands of investors held their breath, and James discovered that life at the summit was far more precarious than he'd ever realized. And then, in the midst of the swirling chaos, Catherine went into labor. It was a stormy night when Catherine's contractions began. Thunder rumbled outside, rain lashing against the windows of the Connecticut estate. James rushed her to the hospital, heart pounding in his chest, a swirl of anxiety and excitement fueling his every step. Dr. Klein met them at the hospital, having been kept on standby for weeks. The labor was intense, lasting nearly 18 hours. During the last excruciating hours, Catherine clutched James's hand, both of them tearful. It was as if, in this moment of vulnerability and pain, the magnitude of their connection surged back, reminding them that they were bound by something far greater than a mere contract or social standing. Finally, as dawn broke, Catherine delivered a healthy baby boy. The newborn's cry pierced the sterile air, and James felt a rush of love so profound it nearly toppled him. Catherine wept with relief and exhaustion, her gaze never leaving the tiny life she now held in her arms. There, in that delivery room, the illusions and betrayals seemed distant for a fleeting moment. The child with James's hair color and Catherine's eyes was the real heir to the Lockwood name, an innocent life untouched by scandal. This was the future that James and Catherine had longed for, a symbol of hope in the midst of their battered world. Karma's reach. Yet karma rarely forgets. Felicia, exposed and scorned, faced financial ruin and social ostracism, the father of her child. Her brief tryst from Boston wanted no part in raising it and refused any responsibility. Felicia was left alone, shamed by the same high society she once courted. She had to sell her Soho apartment to cover her mounting debts, and with her consulting reputation tarnished by scandal, her once promising career prospects evaporated. She found herself reliant on meager freelance gigs overshadowed by the memory of what she almost had and lost. Lockwood Investments also had a reckoning. The firm survived the storm, but had to downsize drastically. Several major projects collapsed, and James's net worth plummeted. Though still wealthy by most standards, he was no longer the unstoppable financial titan. He learned the price of arrogance of placing ambition and fleeting desires over loyalty and honesty. Catherine's road to healing was a slow one. After the baby's birth, she focused on motherhood, immersing herself in the rhythms of caring for her newborn son, whom they named Henry Montgomery Lockwood, a nod to her own lineage. She took a break from public philanthropy, spending quiet mornings in the garden, feeding Henry and reading to him while the sun warmed their corner of the estate. James devoted himself to being the best father he could be. He was determined not to repeat the sins of his own father, who was largely absent during his childhood. Even as he grappled with the ongoing financial complications, he carved out time for late-night feedings, diaper changes, and lullabies. Slowly, Catherine allowed him closer sharing moments of tenderness over Henry's crib. The path to rebuilding trust was long, and they both knew it. But the presence of their baby offered a fresh, if fragile, beginning. In the end, the real heir turned out to be the child born of marital love, the child whose existence reminded everyone that no lie, no affair can overshadow the purity of genuine family bonds. And for James, the hardest lesson arrived in the form of karmic justice. He nearly lost everything chasing a mirage, only to discover that true fortune lay in what he already had: his wife, his family, and the child who now smiled up at him with innocent wonder. Months after Henry's birth, the Lockwood mansion felt simultaneously quieter and fuller. Many of the household staff had been let go to cut expenses, leaving a more intimate environment. Catherine's father's steel company was thriving under new management she had appointed, allowing her the freedom to prioritize her son. James officially resumed his position at Lockwood Investments, though the board remained watchful. Under Edward Kenway's interim leadership, the firm stabilized. Now, with James back, they charted a conservative path forward. Instead of high-stakes gambles, James focused on sustainable growth, forging alliances that emphasized ethical governance and transparency, terms he once considered marketing gimmicks, but now embraced with genuine respect. Catherine and James underwent couples therapy not for a quick fix, but to establish a foundation of communication and respect. Their relationship morphed into something different. Cautious, yes, but also more honest and rooted in mutual responsibility. The memory of James's betrayal did not vanish, but over time it integrated into the tapestry of their marriage. Some days were harder than others, and forgiveness was never a linear journey. But Henry gave them a reason to hope. Felicia Dumont's fall from grace was swift and harsh. She delivered her child in a small clinic outside Manhattan, covered by the meager insurance plan she managed to secure. Without high-profile clients or influential contacts, she was forced to relocate to a modest apartment in Queens, living a life worlds apart from the opulence she once tasted. Occasionally, rumors surfaced that she tried to peddle more stories to tabloid journalists, but interest in her tale faded as quickly as it flared. She was left to confront her choices, raising her child alone. The father provided no support. Felicia was in a battle with him for paternity recognition, though ironically she had once tried to pass the child off as James's. In a final twist of serendipity, Catherine resumed her philanthropic work, in a small capacity contributing to a community center that offered prenatal and parenting classes for single mothers. She did it quietly without fanfare, because in that vulnerable time, she recognized that even those who made terrible decisions, like Felicia, should have resources to ensure their children didn't suffer. The gesture wasn't exactly forgiveness, but it was empathy born out of Catherine's own experiences with heartbreak and betrayal. James spent many hours in his newborn son's nursery, reflecting on the arc of his life, how he rose from nothing to become a wealthy titan, only to nearly lose everything chasing illusions. He realized Henry was the truest form of wealth he could ever claim. And each time he kissed the baby's forehead, each time he felt the tiny fingers curl around his own, he remembered what it meant to have a second chance. In that sense, the final moral of the story is simple and profound. Fortunes can be made or lost, scandals can erupt and fade, but real wealth rooted in loyalty, love, and the innocent hope of a child endures no matter how fiercely the winds of karma may blow. Thank you for joining us on this emotional journey of love, betrayal, and redemption. The Lockwood story reminds us that no amount of money or success can shield us from the consequences of our choices. In the end, karma finds its way, exposing our deepest truths and reminding us of what truly matters: honesty, family, and integrity. If you enjoyed unraveling this gripping tale, complete with shocking twists and real-life lessons, please take a moment to support our channel. Your likes, shares, and subscriptions help us bring more riveting stories to life. We appreciate your time and hope this dramatic account will linger in your mind, reminding you that even in the darkest betrayals, there can be hope, healing, and sometimes a precious new beginning. Hit that like button, share this video with friends, and subscribe for more stories that will keep you on the edge of your seat. Thank you for watching. A single sentence, a desperate plea from a pregnant wife to her husband. But when Kate Campbell arrived at the lavish estate hoping for comfort, she found only humiliation. In front of the jeering, champagne-sipping crowd, he called his friends Raymond. Campbell looked at his trembling, visibly pregnant wife and uttered 6 words that shattered her world. "I have no idea who she is." He chose status over his family, laughter over love. But Raymond and his arrogant friends had no idea who they had just crossed. Because the next morning, in the most important meeting of their lives, the woman they dismissed would be the one deciding their fate. Kate Campbell traced the rim of her chamomile tea mug, the steam warming her face, but doing little to melt the icy knot of anxiety in her stomach. Outside the panoramic window of their penthouse apartment, the city lights of Boston glittered like a carpet of scattered diamonds. It was a view that cost more than the house she'd grown up in, a view that was supposed to signify that she and Raymond had made it. Lately, it just made her feel higher up with a longer way to fall. "You're still up." Raymond's voice, smooth and practiced, emerged from the bedroom. He was adjusting the cuffs of his $1,000 shirt, his reflection sharp and impeccable in the hallway's floor-to-ceiling mirror. At 34, Raymond Campbell was the epitome of success, a senior vice president at Sterling and Vance, one of the city's most prestigious investment firms. He had sandy blonde hair that fell with a kind of calculated casualness, eyes the color of a summer sky, and a smile that could disarm regulators and charm fortunes out of old money matriarchs. I have a bad feeling about this weekend, Jules," Kate said, her voice soft. She was 5 months pregnant, a gentle, burgeoning curve beneath her simple cotton nightgown. Her dark hair, a stark contrast to his sun-kissed look, was tied back, and her face, usually bright and expressive, was shadowed with worry. Raymond sighed, the sound laced with a familiar, patronizing patience. "Amy, we've been over this. It's Marcus Thorne's annual autumn hunt party. Everyone who's anyone will be there. It's not just a party, it's the Berkshire version of the stock exchange floor. I need to be there." "I know that," she said, turning to face him. "It's just, you've been so distant. And with the baby. The baby is fine." "You are fine," he said, walking over and placing a perfunctory kiss on her forehead. It felt like a CEO stamping a document, approved. "Everything I do for us, for this family." He gestured vaguely at the opulent apartment at the glittering city beyond. "This doesn't happen by accident. It happens by shaking the right hands, laughing at the right jokes, and being at Marcus Thorne's estate." Kate knew of Marcus Thorne. She'd never met him, as Raymond had a habit of keeping his work friends and his home life in separate, hermetically sealed containers. Marcus was old money, the kind that viewed Raymond's hard-earned success as charmingly novel but ultimately second-tier. Raymond orbited men like Marcus, desperate for their casual inherited validation. "Can't I come with you?" she asked, a final hopeful plea. "I'll stay out of your way. I just don't want to be alone all weekend." Raymond's face tightened, almost imperceptibly. "It's a boys' weekend, Amy. Stag hunt poker cigars. You'd be bored to tears, and honestly." He paused, choosing his words. It would change the dynamic. "They see me as this shark, this killer in the boardroom. A pregnant wife, it softens the image." The words meant to sound like a strategic calculation, landed like 1,000 tiny cuts. Softens the image, as if their child, their future, was a branding liability. "Okay," she whispered, turning back to the window. "Okay, Raymond. Go, have fun." He gave her shoulder a squeeze. "That's my girl. I'll call you tomorrow. Don't wait up." She listened to the door click shut. The silence of the penthouse, suddenly deafening. The knot of anxiety in her stomach coiled tighter, morphing into a cold, hard dread. She picked up her phone and looked at the ultrasound picture she'd set as her wallpaper, a grainy black-and-white promise of a life to come. "He does love us," she told herself. A mantra that was sounding thinner and more desperate each time she repeated it. He's just under a lot of pressure. The next evening, the dread hadn't subsided. It had grown fed by a day of silence. No call, no text, just the single sterile read receipt on the message she'd sent him that morning. Around 7 p.m., a sharp, cramping pain seized her abdomen. It was sudden and fierce, stealing her breath. Panic, cold and electric, shot through her. She waited, breathing through it, praying it was just a Braxton Hicks contraction, something the books described as normal. But then another one came harder this time. She called her obstetrician's on-call number. The doctor was calm, reassuring. It was likely nothing, she said, but given it was her first pregnancy, she should try to relax. Stress could be a major factor. If the pains got closer together, or were accompanied by any spotting, she should come into the hospital immediately. "Is your husband there?" the doctor asked. "No, he's out of town," Kate replied, the words tasting like ash. "Well, try to put your feet up, drink some water, and have a friend or family member come stay with you just in case." Kate hung up, feeling the full, crushing weight of her isolation. Her family was in Ohio, 1,000 miles away. Her friends in Boston were from her old life, the one before Raymond, and she'd let those connections wither, caught up in his dazzling, demanding world. There was no one to call. The doctor's words echoed in her mind. Stress could be a major factor. All she could think about was Raymond at a party laughing and networking while she was here alone and terrified. The thought fueled a desperate resolve. She couldn't just sit here. She needed him. She needed her husband. She knew the estate was somewhere in the Berkshires, a 2-hour drive away. She remembered Raymond mentioning the town name, once Lennox. A quick search for Marcus Thorne Estate. Lennox brought up a slew of society pages and Architectural Digest articles. The Thorne family's autumn cottage was a place called Blackwood Manor, an infamous Gilded Age monstrosity of granite and slate. Without a second thought, she threw on a simple maternity dress, grabbed her purse and keys, and left the silent penthouse. The drive was a blur of highway lights and the thrumming of her own heartbeat. The cramping subsided into a dull, persistent ache, but the fear remained. Each mile that passed, she rehearsed what she would say. She wouldn't be angry. She'd just be relieved. She'd pull him aside quietly and tell him she'd had a scare, that she just needed to be with him. He would understand. He had to. Arriving at Blackwood Manor was like driving onto a movie set. A long, winding driveway was lined with flaming torches illuminating ancient oak trees. Valets in crisp uniforms were parking an endless stream of Porsches, Bentleys, and Teslas. Music and laughter spilled from the brilliantly lit mansion, a sprawling castle of dark stone and diamond-paned windows. She felt a tremor of self-consciousness. She was in a simple cotton dress. Her hair hastily brushed her face, pale with worry. She looked nothing like the women she saw stepping out of the luxury cars, draped in cashmere and dripping with jewels. She gave her modest sedan to a valet who looked at it with thinly veiled disdain and walked towards the colossal front doors. The noise and heat hit her like a physical blow. The air was thick with the smell of expensive cologne wood smoke from a massive fireplace and whiskey. The great hall was thronged with men in tweed and tailored jackets and women in chic, understatedly expensive attire. In the center of it all, holding court by the fireplace, was Raymond. He was laughing, a glass of amber liquid in his hand. He was surrounded by a group of men, including a handsome, hawk-nosed man she assumed was their host, Marcus Thorne. A stunning woman with sharp, predatory features and a crimson dress, Chloe Vance was hanging on Raymond's arm. Her laughter a little too loud, her hand a little too high on his bicep. Kate's heart, which had been pounding with fear, now began to thud with a different, more painful emotion. She took a hesitant step forward, trying to catch his eye. "Raymond," she called out, her voice barely a whisper. He didn't hear her. She took another step, moving into the light. "Raymond." This time his head turned. His eyes met hers. For a split second, she saw a flicker of genuine shock of recognition. But it was instantly extinguished, replaced by a cold, blank slate. His smile didn't falter, but it became a mask. Marcus Thorne noticed Raymond's gaze and followed it to Kate. He looked her up and down from her simple dress to her visible baby bump, a sneer playing on his lips. "Raymond, my boy." Marcus drawled, his voice carrying across the sudden lull in their conversation. "You have an admirer. Do you know this woman?" The world seemed to slow down. The crackling of the fire, the murmur of the party, the clinking of glasses. It all faded into a dull roar. Kate stood frozen, her hand instinctively going to her belly. She watched her husband's face, pleading with her eyes for him to do the right thing. To say, "Yes, this is my wife, Kate." Excuse us for a moment." Raymond looked from Kate's desperate face to Marcus's mocking one, and then to the circle of expectant, judgmental faces around him. He saw Chloe Vance's perfectly arched eyebrow challenging him. He saw the cumulative weight of their status, their power, their acceptance. And he made a choice. He gave a short, dismissive laugh. He turned his body slightly away from her, a gesture of pure, absolute rejection. Looking directly at Marcus, but speaking loudly enough for everyone to hear, he said the 6 words that would echo in the chambers of Kate's heart forever. "I have no idea who she is." A wave of snickering went through the group. Chloe tightened her grip on Raymond's arm, a triumphant smirk on her face. "Probably just some local girl who heard there was a party," she said, her voice dripping with venom. "Maybe she's looking for a rich baby daddy. You ought to be more careful, Raymond." Raymond played along, a pained but amused expression on his face. The perils of being so charming, he joked weakly. Kate felt the floor drop out from under her. The air was punched from her lungs. It wasn't just the denial. It was the casual cruelty, the laughter. He hadn't just denied her. He had offered her up for sport. She was a ghost in front of the man she loved, a stranger to the father of her child. The physical pain in her abdomen was nothing compared to the agony that ripped through her soul. Her vision swam. She saw Raymond turn his back on her, completely raising his glass to his friends. She saw Marcus Thorne give a security guard a subtle nod in her direction. Shame, hot and suffocating, washed over her. She wouldn't give them the satisfaction of seeing her break. With a strength she didn't know she possessed, she pulled her shoulders back. She met the smug gaze of Chloe Vance for a brief, searing moment. Then she turned without another word and walked away. She moved with a strange, dreamlike calm, past the jeering faces through the colossal doors and back into the cold night air. The valet, seeing her pale face and tear-filled eyes, retrieved her car with uncharacteristic speed and silence. She didn't cry on the drive back to Boston. The pain was too deep for tears. It was a cold, hard, crystallizing fury. The man she had loved, the man for whom she had sacrificed her own ambitions and friendships, had disowned her and their unborn child for the price of a laugh from a roomful of shallow, cruel people. As she drove, the shock began to recede, replaced by a chilling clarity. The cramping in her belly had stopped, as if her body understood that it needed to be strong now. She was no longer just Kate Campbell, the supportive wife. That woman had died in the great hall of Blackwood Manor. When she finally walked back into the silent, glittering penthouse, it no longer felt like home. It felt like a core he had built for her. And she knew with absolute certainty that she was done being the songbird. It was time to show him her claws. She sat down, not at the kitchen table, but at the sleek glass desk in the study, Raymond's desk. She opened her laptop, the screen illuminating her face, now set like stone. Her fingers flew across the keyboard, not searching for baby names or parenting blogs, but opening secure files, firing off encrypted emails, and making a single critical phone call. "David," she said, when a calm voice answered. "It's me. We're moving up the timeline. Full execution. Now." Raymond Campbell woke up with a pounding headache and the sour taste of expensive whiskey in his mouth. Sunlight streamed through the guest room window at Blackwood Manor, mocking his throbbing temples. Fragments of the previous night came back to him in disjointed flashes. The roaring fire, the endless flow of Macallan, 25. Marcus Thorne, clapping him on the back. Chloe Vance's fingers tracing patterns on his arm, and then the memory that made his stomach clench Kate. He winced, rolling over. The image of her face, the shock, the hurt, the betrayal was seared into his brain. A wave of something that felt like guilt, but was quickly suppressed by self-preservation, washed over him. What else could he have done? Acknowledging her would have been social suicide. He would have become a laughingstock. Marcus and his circle were brutal. They preyed on weakness, and showing up with a frantic, pregnant wife was the very definition of weakness in their world. "I'll fix it," he told himself, the way he always did. He'd go home, buy her some extravagant piece of jewelry, tell her he was drunk and panicked that he was protecting his career for them. She'd be angry, she'd cry, but she'd forgive him. She always did. Kate was gentle, understanding. That was one of the things he'd loved about her. She was his soft place to land. He checked his phone. Nothing from her. No angry texts, no missed calls. A flicker of unease went through him. That was unusual. Silence from Kate was worse than shouting. Still, he brushed it off. He had bigger things to worry about today. Monday. The big day. The entire senior leadership of Sterling and Vance had been on edge for weeks. The firm was in trouble. A series of aggressive, high-risk investments, many spearheaded by his own department, had soured dramatically. A rival firm, a mysterious and ruthlessly efficient entity known only as the Phoenix Group, had been buying up their debt and was now poised for what looked like a hostile takeover. Today, there was an emergency all-hands board meeting. The firm's founder and CEO, the formidable Arthur Sterling, had called it. The rumor was that they were going to meet the principal of the Phoenix Group for the first time. Raymond showered, put on his best suit, his armor, and drove back to Boston, a knot of professional anxiety replacing his marital guilt. He needed to be sharp to position himself as indispensable a key player in whatever new regime was coming. His entire identity, his penthouse, his seat at tables like Marcus Thorne's, it all depended on his position at Sterling and Vance. He walked into the headquarters, a skyscraper of steel and smoked glass in the heart of the financial district, with his game face on. He nodded confidently at colleagues, his demeanor betraying none of his hangover or his domestic turmoil. He strode into the 40th floor boardroom, a magnificent space with a mahogany table the size of a small boat and a wall of windows offering a godlike view of the city. The mood was funereal. Arthur Sterling, a man in his late 60s with a face like a carved eagle, stood at the head of the table. The other partners and VPs were scattered around, their faces grim. Raymond took his usual seat, feeling a thrill of importance despite the dire circumstances. "Thank you for coming." Sterling began, his voice gravelly. "As you know, the firm is facing an unprecedented challenge. The Phoenix Group has us cornered. They have the votes, they have the capital, and they have acquired a controlling interest in our debt. In short, the wolf is no longer at the door. It is in the house." A nervous murmur went through the room. For weeks, they have operated through lawyers and shell corporations, a complete enigma. We knew them only by their reputation, brilliant, aggressive, and utterly invisible. Their leader has been a ghost. Until now. Sterling paused, letting the tension build. "The principal of the Phoenix Group has agreed to meet with us today to lay out their terms. They are on their way up now." Raymond straightened his tie, his mind racing. Who could it be? A corporate raider from New York, a sovereign wealth fund from the Middle East. He prepared himself to be deferential, impressive to survive the culling that was sure to come. The heavy oak doors of the boardroom swung open. Every head turned. Raymond's included, and the world stopped turning on its axis. Standing in the doorway was Kate. But it was not the Kate he knew. It wasn't the soft, gentle woman who drank chamomile tea and worried about him. This woman was a stranger. She wore a bespoke charcoal grey power suit that fit her perfectly, accentuating her pregnancy not as a vulnerability, but as an undeniable fact of her presence. Her hair was pulled back into a severe, elegant chignon. Her face, free of makeup, save for a slash of bold red lipstick, was calm, confident, and utterly unreadable. The only hint of the woman from the party was the cold, hard fury that now glittered in her eyes like black diamonds. She was flanked by two men in dark suits, one of whom Raymond vaguely recognized as David Chen, a famously sharp corporate lawyer. A wave of confused silence washed over the boardroom. One of the older partners, confused, muttered, "Can we help you, miss?" Kate's eyes scanned the room, passing over the stunned faces of the partners before landing on Raymond. She held his gaze for a single, chilling moment. His blood ran cold. His mouth went dry. This couldn't be real. It was a stress-induced hallucination. A nightmare. Arthur Sterling, who had clearly been expecting her, stepped forward. His voice was filled with a respect Raymond had never heard before. "Gentlemen," Sterling announced, his voice booming in the silent room, "allow me to introduce the principal and managing partner of the Phoenix Group." Kate stepped forward, her heels clicking with quiet authority on the marble floor. She walked to the front of the room, to the large digital screen on the wall that had until a moment ago been showing the Sterling and Vance corporate logo. She tapped a key on a tablet held by her associate. The S&V logo vanished, replaced by the Phoenix Group's emblem, a stylized bird rising from flames. Beneath it, a name and a title appeared in stark white letters, and below that, a professional headshot. A photo of Kate's face, strong and confident, now covered the boardroom wall. Kate Rose Vance, Principal. The Phoenix Group. The name hit Raymond like a physical blow. Vance, as in Sterling and Vance, as in Chloe Vance, Marcus Thorne's catty friend. He'd always thought it was a coincidence. He knew Kate's maiden name was Vance, but she'd always been cagey about her family, saying they were estranged and modest people from out of state. He'd assumed they were nobodies, a detail from a past she, and by extension, he was better off leaving behind. He never once connected it to the Vance of Sterling and Vance, the brilliant but reclusive co-founder who had supposedly cashed out and vanished decades ago. A horrified gasp came from one of the senior partners. Vance, as in Edward Vance? Girl. Kate gave a cool, almost imperceptible nod. "Edward was my grandfather," she said, her voice even and clear, resonating with an authority that pinned every man in the room to his seat. He was displeased with the direction the firm took after his departure. He left his shares and his seed capital in a blind trust for me. I've spent the last 10 years growing it. Her eyes swept the room again, a predator surveying its territory. My firm, the Phoenix Group, is now the majority shareholder and primary creditor of Sterling and Vance, which means, as of this morning, you all work for me. The silence that followed was absolute, shattered only by the sound of Raymond Campbell's world collapsing around him. He stared at the giant image of his wife's face on the wall, the wife he had publicly denied and humiliated less than 48 hours ago. The woman he had called a liability, a softening of his image. He was not looking at his wife. He was looking at the wolf, and she was smiling. The boardroom, once a bastion of male bravado and financial power, had transformed into a courtroom, and Kate was the judge, jury, and executioner. The men who had ruled this firm for decades, men who had always viewed Raymond as a rising star, now looked at him with a mixture of confusion and dawning contempt. They were connecting the dots, and the picture they formed was one of Raymond as a fool of monumental proportions. Kate, or rather Miss Vance, as her associate David Chen had pointedly called her, began to speak. She didn't yell. She didn't recriminate. She did something far more terrifying. She wielded facts like a surgeon's scalpel. For the past 18 months, she began pacing slowly before the digital screen, which now displayed a dizzying array of charts and spreadsheets. Sterling and Vance has been operating on a foundation of untenable risk. The Latin American Commodities Fund, for example. She paused, and her eyes, cold and precise, found Raymond. "Mr. Campbell," she said, her tone utterly devoid of any personal history. It was the voice of a superior addressing a deeply disappointing subordinate. "Your department's quarterly reports projected a 12% growth. Optimistic, given the political instability in the region, a factor your risk assessments conveniently downplayed. The Phoenix Group's analysis projected a 4% loss. The actual result, as of last week, was a catastrophic 9% loss, which has triggered covenants on over $200 million of our debt." Raymond felt the blood drain from his face. He wanted to speak to defend himself, but his tongue felt thick and useless. He looked around the table for support, but his colleagues, men he'd had drinks with and shared locker-room jokes with, avoided his gaze. They were all trying to distance themselves from the radioactive contamination of his failure. Kate continued her dissection of the firm's finances, both brutal and brilliant. She moved from department to department, exposing inflated projections, lazy due diligence, and a culture of cronyism that prioritized bonuses over stability. She knew everything. It was clear she hadn't just bought the company. She had studied it, understood its every weakness, every secret. She had been watching them for years. The culture here, she said, her gaze sweeping across the stunned faces, has become one of image over substance, of chasing short-term highs at the expense of long-term health. This firm was built on a reputation of trust and prudence by my grandfather and Mr. Sterling. That reputation has been squandered. Finally, she turned her attention back to the silent, ashen-faced Raymond. "Which brings me to personnel. There will be a full-scale audit of every department. Redundancies will be identified. Inefficiencies will be eliminated." Her eyes locked with his. There was no flicker of the woman he had married, only the glacial power of the woman he had scorned. "We will start with the departments that have demonstrated the most creative accounting. Campbell, please have your team prepare all of their files and correspondence for my review. My forensic accountants will be on site this afternoon. You will cooperate fully." It was a public execution. She wasn't firing him. Not yet. She was dismantling him piece by piece in front of the very people whose respect he had killed his family for. He was no longer Raymond Campbell, the Golden Boy SVP. He was Mr. Campbell, the person of interest in a corporate investigation led by his own wife. "That is all for now," Kate concluded, turning to Arthur Sterling. "Mr. Sterling, you and I will confer in your office. The rest of you back to work. I expect you to conduct yourselves with the utmost professionalism during this transition." With that, she turned and walked out of the boardroom, her team trailing in her wake like a royal retinue. The spell was broken. The room erupted in a cacophony of panicked whispers and accusations, but no one spoke to Raymond. He was suddenly invisible, a ghost in his own professional life, just as he had made Kate a ghost at the party. He sat paralyzed, staring at the empty doorway she had disappeared through. It took him 10 minutes to regain control of his limbs. He stood up on shaky legs and walked out of the boardroom, his ears burning with the shame of it all. As he walked through the open-plan office, he could feel the eyes on him. The news was already spreading like wildfire. Secretaries were whispering behind their hands. Junior analysts were staring openly. He was a dead man walking. He had to talk to her. He had to get to her before she left the building. He didn't even know what he would say. Sorry. It felt like using a paper cup to bail out the Titanic. He took the executive elevator up to the CEO's suite, his heart hammering against his ribs. He found her just as she was leaving Arthur Sterling's office. David Chen was at her side holding a folder. "Kate!" He croaked, his voice raw. She stopped and turned to him. Her face was a mask of professional neutrality. "Mr. Campbell," she corrected him coldly. "Do you have something to report regarding the preparation of your files?" "Kate, please," he begged, taking a step closer. David Chen subtly moved between them, a silent, impassive bodyguard. "We need to talk. What you did in there, how could you? And your name? Vance. Why did you never tell me?" A flicker of something dark and painful crossed her features before being suppressed. "Tell you what, Raymond? That my grandfather was a brilliant man who was heartbroken by what his firm became, that I spent my entire adult life building a company on his principles of merit and integrity, not on backslapping and old boys' clubs. Why would I share that with you? You were so enamored with the world of Marcus Thorne, so desperate to be one of them. You would have tried to use my legacy as your own personal social currency. You would have cheapened it, just as you cheapened me." "No," he stammered. "No, I love you." Kate let out a short, bitter laugh that held no humor. "Love. You don't know the first thing about love. Love is not abandoning your pregnant wife when she's terrified and in pain. Love is not denying her existence to impress a group of shallow bullies. Love is not choosing a fleeting moment of status over a lifetime of family." She took a step forward, forcing David Chen to move aside. She lowered her voice, a venomous whisper, meant only for him. "You looked at me on Saturday night, scared and alone, and carrying your child, and you decided I was worthless. So I am going to show you and this entire city exactly what I am worth. You wanted an imager shark, a killer. Be careful what you wish for, Raymond. You just might get it. The baby." He managed to say his last, desperate gambit. "What about our baby?" Her hand went to her belly, the first gesture of softness he had seen all day. But her eyes remained hard as flint. "This is my baby," she said, with chilling finality. "I will be its mother, and if necessary, its father. I will give this child a legacy of strength and self-respect. You will have no part in that. You have forfeited your rights." She started to walk away. "Kate, wait," he called out, his voice cracking with desperation. "I'm sorry. I am so sorry." She stopped at the elevator bank, but didn't turn around. "I know you are, Raymond," she said, her back still to him. "You're not sorry you did it. You're just sorry you got caught." The elevator doors opened. She stepped inside without a backward glance. The doors slid shut, leaving Raymond standing alone in the hallway, the reflection of a broken man staring back at him from the polished brass. He had lost everything: his career, his reputation, and the woman who was not only his wife, but he now realized with sickening certainty the most formidable person he had ever known. And the nightmare was only just beginning. The silence that followed Kate's ascension was not empty. It was a heavy, suffocating element, thick with unspoken judgment, and the static of 1,000 frantic messages crisscrossing the city's financial networks. For Raymond, the penthouse, once a symbol of his arrival, became a sound-proofed chamber of torment. The panoramic view of Boston was no longer a conquest. It was a constant, glittering reminder of the world that had cast him out. His days bled into one another in a haze of sleeplessness and dread. He'd wake up not to the gentle Boston dawn, but to the jolt of his own heart pounding with a primal fear. He'd reach for his phone, a masochistic ritual to scroll through the news. The stories were relentless, each one a fresh nail in his professional coffin. Vance heiress seizes ancestral firm in shock takeover, read the Financial Times. The ghost of Vance returns to clean house, declared a Forbes online piece. They lauded Kate's brilliance, her strategic genius, her quiet decade-long crusade to reclaim her grandfather's legacy. She was the phoenix. He was the ash. The most galling part was their praise for her methods. They called her team's audit a surgical strike. Her forensic accountants, a quiet, unassuming team from a boutique firm, descended on Sterling and Vance, not with bluster, but with an unnerving politeness. They didn't confiscate servers. They mirrored them. They didn't interrogate staff. They held brief, courteous interviews, their questions so precise they felt like pre-written accusations. Raymond learned through a terrified junior analyst who still dared to speak to him that they had uncovered everything. The inflated projections on the Latin American Commodities Fund were not just presented as bad calls, but as a pattern. They found emails where Raymond had explicitly told his team to find a rosier narrative to present to the risk committee. They unearthed his expense reports, a chronicle of his desperation for social acceptance. Dinners at Mau, where he'd entertained Marcus Thorne, and his circle were logged as Client Development Thorne Industries. The accountants had cross-referenced these dates with Marcus's social media finding pictures of the group, laughing with captions like, "Another wild Tuesday with the boys." It wasn't just mismanagement. It was a narrative of deceit, a portrait of a man who used company funds to build a fantasy life. He tried to function. He'd sit at his glass desk, the one Kate had used to launch her coup, and stare at market data. But the numbers swam before his eyes. They were a language he no longer spoke. His entire career had been built on a specific type of confidence, a belief in his own ability to shape reality through charm and aggressive optimism. Kate had shattered that reality with something cold, hard, and undeniable: the truth. His social excommunication was absolute. He was a digital leper. Emails to former colleagues bounced back with automated out-of-office replies, a coward's block. He sent a pleading text to Chloe Vance, the woman who had smirked so triumphantly on his arm that fateful night. "Chloe, I know this is a mess, but your family is involved. We should talk." The reply was instant and cutting. "My family is the Vance family. You are a Campbell. I think you'll find there's a significant difference. Do not contact me again." He was an infection they were all desperate to prove they were immune to. One evening, after 3 days of hearing nothing but the hum of the refrigerator and the pounding in his own skull, the chime of the elevator echoed through the apartment. He felt a surge of adrenaline. Was it her? Had she come to deliver the final blow in person? He opened the door to find Marcus Thorne. The man's usual air of languid aristocratic arrogance was gone, replaced by a pallid, wired tension. His eyes, usually filled with detached amusement, were sharp with panic. Marcus Raymond breathed a pathetic flicker of hope igniting. Maybe this was an olive branch, a sign that his exile wasn't permanent. Thank God. I've been calling you. Don't. Marcus snapped his voice tight as a guitar string. He didn't wait for an invitation, pushing past Raymond and striding into the center of the living room. He scanned the opulent space with a look of disgust, as if seeing for the first time how derivative it all was. Don't you dare act like we're friends. Friendship implies a certain level of mutual respect. I have none left for you. The hope in Raymond's chest died, replaced by a cold dread. What are you talking about? After all the what? Raymond Marcus spun on him, his composure cracking, revealing the raw fury beneath. After all the times I let you into my world, the world you mimicked and aped so desperately. Do you have any idea what you've done? He began to pace his movements, jerky and agitated. My family's holding company. Thorn Industries was one of the original investors in this city's financial bedrock. Our position in Sterling and Vance wasn't just a line item on a balance sheet. It was a legacy holding, a symbol of our family's history in Boston. Since your wife took over, the stock has stabilized, but only after a 30% haircut. 30% wiped out because the firm's guts were rotten. And who do they now see as the poster boy for that rot? I didn't know who she was. Raymond pleaded, his voice thin. I swear to you, Marcus, and that's the entire pathetic point. Marcus roared, stopping his pacing to jab a finger at Raymond. It's worse that you didn't know. You stood in my home, a home that has hosted Kennedys and Cabots, and you publicly disowned your pregnant wife to get a laugh out of me. You treated her like dirt because you assumed she was dirt. You have no judgment, Raymond. None. And now the world knows that I, Marcus Thorn, associate with men who have no judgment. Men who are cruel to women for sport. He let out a bitter, humorless laugh. Do you understand? This isn't about your loyalty to me. It's about the fact that your staggering stupidity has now become a stain on my reputation. My father called me from Geneva this morning. He wasn't just angry about the money. He was apoplectic about the optics. The company you keep, he said, it reflects on us all. The ultimate irony washed over Raymond with the force of a tidal wave. Marcus wasn't angry about the moral failure. He was furious about the strategic one. Raymond had bet on the wrong horse in the most spectacular fashion imaginable, and it had made Marcus look like a bad gambler. She's not just cleaning house, you idiot, Marcus continued, his voice dropping to a venomous hiss. She's performing a public exorcism. She's going after anyone and everyone tied to the old culture of backroom deals and clubby handshakes. Her auditors flagged a land deal my father made with Sterling 20 years ago. It was perfectly legal, but it was informal. Now it's under a microscope. You didn't just invite the wolf into the henhouse. You handed it the keys and a map to everyone's nests. You are radioactive, Raymond, and I am here to tell you that your contamination ends now. Marcus walked to the door, his posture regaining its aristocratic stiffness. He paused with his hand on the handle and looked back at Raymond, his eyes as cold and unforgiving as a winter sea. I came here as a courtesy to inform you that any association between us is officially over. If reporters ask, I will tell them the truth. You were a junior executive at a bank we occasionally used. A passing acquaintance. A nobody. Our connection was as superficial and meaningless as you are." He opened the door and left. The heavy silence rushed back in to fill the void more oppressive than before. The last bridge hadn't just been burned, it had been dynamited, its foundations obliterated. He was an island, and the tide was rising. A week passed in that silent purgatory. Then an email arrived. It was from an unfamiliar address with a simple subject line, "Meeting." The body of the message contained only an address, a date, and a time. It was for a private room at a discreet restaurant in Beacon Hill, a place known for its old-world charm and soundproof walls, a place where deals were made and secrets were kept. Raymond dressed for the meeting like a man dressing for his own execution. He chose a subdued grey suit, a far cry from the confident blues and pinstripes he used to favor. When he arrived, she was already there, sitting at a corner table overlooking a quiet, tree-lined street. The afternoon light caught the curve of her cheek, and for a moment she looked like the Kate he'd fallen in love with. But then she turned, and her eyes held the cool, distant authority he'd come to fear. She was more beautiful than ever, glowing with health and power. Her pregnancy was no longer a gentle curve, but a proud, prominent declaration of the new life she commanded. "Hello, Raymond," she said. Her voice was calm without malice. It was worse than anger. It was indifference. "Kate," he replied, his own voice sounding foreign and weak. He sat the chair, scraping loudly in the quiet room. "Why am I here?" "The audit is complete," she stated simply, placing a slim, unmarked folder on the white tablecloth between them. "And because, despite my better judgment, I am offering you a choice. It's a courtesy you did not afford me on the night I came to you for help." His eyes were fixed on the folder. It felt like a bomb. "What is it?" "It contains 2 possible futures for you." She explained, her tone as measured as if she were discussing a business proposal. "The first is the full report from my forensic accounting team. It details a consistent pattern of professional misconduct, falsification of internal documents, and clear grounds for an SEC investigation into securities fraud. It's more than enough to have you barred from the financial industry for life. With a motivated prosecutor, you would almost certainly face criminal charges. Your name, your picture, everything you built would become synonymous with disgrace." Raymond felt the blood drain from his face. He could see it all, the headlines, the trial, the utter annihilation of his identity. "That is one path," she continued, her gaze unwavering. She slowly slid a single piece of paper from the folder and placed it on top. "The other is this, a letter of resignation effective immediately. It cites vague personal reasons and contains a standard but ironclad non-disclosure agreement. If you sign it, you will walk away from Sterling and Vance. You will receive no severance, no golden parachute. You will simply disappear from this world. In return, the audit's findings will be permanently sealed. I will not pursue any legal or civil action. You will be free to leave Boston and attempt to build a new life however you see fit." He stared at the single sheet of paper. It was an escape hatch from a crashing plane. A pardon. An act of mercy so profound and undeserved it took his breath away. "Why?" He whispered the question tearing from his throat. "After everything I did to you, to us, why would you give me a way out?" Kate was quiet for a long time, her gaze shifting to the window, watching a leaf spiral down to the cobblestone street. When she looked back at him, the corporate armor in her eyes seemed to crack, revealing a deep, aching sadness beneath. "Because one day," she said, her voice softening, for the first time. My child, our child will be old enough to type their father's name into a search engine. And I will not have the first result be a mugshot. I will not have their legacy be defined by your conviction. I am not doing this for you, Raymond. I've accepted that the man I married is gone. I am doing this for my baby. Her hand went to her belly, a protective maternal gesture that was both beautiful and heartbreaking. I am giving our child the gift of a father who is a failure, who is a memory, but who is not a felon. I am giving you this chance so that you do not cast a permanent shadow on an innocent life. What you do with that gift, that is entirely on you. The truth of her words dismantled the last of his defenses. All his ambition, his hunger for status, his desperate need to be seen as powerful, it was all so hollow, so pathetic, compared to the fierce, selfless love she had for their unborn child. He wasn't being punished by a corporate rival. He was being saved by a mother. A tear escaped his eye, then another rolling hot down his cheek. It wasn't the performative sorrow of a man who'd been caught. It was the genuine, soul-crushing grief of a man finally seeing the full scope of what he had destroyed. "I'm sorry, Kate." He choked out the words raw and broken. "Not for my job. Not for my reputation. I am so sorry for that night. For looking at you and not seeing you. I was a coward. I was a monster. I broke your heart, and I know I will spend the rest of my life regretting it." She gave a slow, final nod. It was not forgiveness. It was not absolution. It was an acknowledgement, an ending. "I know." He reached for the pen, his hand shaking so badly he could barely grip it. He looked at the resignation letter. It was the death certificate for Raymond Campbell, the man who had everything and valued nothing. But she was right. It was also a birth certificate, a chance to become someone else, someone better. A chance, however slim, to one day be a man that his child would not have to be ashamed of. He signed his name. He slid the paper across the table, a final, unconditional surrender. "Thank you," he whispered. Kate took the letter, her expression unreadable. She placed it back in the folder and stood her movements fluid and graceful. "Goodbye, Raymond." She turned and walked away, not looking back. He watched her go, a queen leaving a conquered territory, a mother returning to the future she was building. He was left alone in the silent room, with nothing but the ruins of his life, and the first terrifying ray of light in a long, dark road to redemption. In the end, Raymond Campbell didn't lose his career because of a bad investment. He lost it because he made the worst investment of all. He traded a lifetime of love and family for a moment of acceptance from people who didn't matter. Kate's story is a powerful reminder that true strength isn't about the image you project. It's about the integrity you hold when no one is watching. It's about knowing your own worth, even when those closest to you refuse to see it. She didn't just take back a company. She took back her life, her name, and her future, proving that the most formidable power in the world is a person who has nothing left to lose and everything to build. What did you think of Kate's ultimate power move? Do you believe Raymond deserved the second chance she gave him? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. If this story resonated with you, please hit that like button. Share it with someone who needs to hear it, and make sure you subscribe to our channel for more real-life drama that will leave you thinking. Thank you for watching.